At 7:55 on the morning of December 7th, 1941, Mess Attendant 3rd Class Doris Miller stood in the laundry room of the USS West Virginia, folding white officer's underwear. He was 22 years old, from Waco, Texas, 6 feet 3 inches tall, 220 pounds of muscle, earned from his childhood picking cotton and his high school years playing fullback. His hands, scarred from years of working in ship galleys and handling scalding pots, moved mechanically through the pile of clothes. Above him, on the deck, the ship's morning watch was changing. The harbor was calm. Pearl Harbor on a Sunday morning was always calm. In 3 minutes, Doris Miller's life would change forever. In 3 minutes, he would touch a weapon the United States Navy had forbidden him to hold. In 3 minutes, he would become the first American hero of World War II. But right now, at 7:55 a.m., he was doing laundry because that was all the Navy would let a black man do. The irony would not be lost on him later when he stood covered in blood and cordite, having just shot planes from the sky with a gun he had never been trained to fire. But that was 3 minutes away. Right now, he was folding underwear. If you want to see how a man the Navy wouldn't train to fight became America's first hero, only to be forgotten for 77 years because of the color of his skin, hit that like button. This is the story they didn't want you to know. This is Doris Miller, and please subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be told. Back to Dory. Doris Miller hated his first name. His mother, Henrietta, had been expecting a girl. When her 4th son arrived on October 12, 1919, in Waco, Texas, she kept the name she had chosen, Doris. The other boys in Waco called him Dory to make it more masculine, but it never stopped the fights. Dory learned to fight early. 6 feet 3 by age 16, he was the largest boy in Moore High School. He played fullback on the football team. He was good. Scouts from Prairie View A&M watched him. But the Great Depression had destroyed his family's finances. His father, Connery Miller, worked as a sharecropper, never earning enough to escape debt. College was impossible. In September 1938, at age 19, Dory walked into a Navy recruiting office in Waco. The recruiter, a white petty officer, looked him up and down, asked if he could read and write. Dory could. Asked if he understood that the Navy had specific roles for Negroes. Dory said he understood. The recruiter handed him enlistment papers. Dory signed. He was promised $21 a month, 3 meals a day, and the chance to see the world. What the recruiter did not mention was that Dory would see that world from the galley, cooking food for white sailors, or from the laundry room, washing their clothes, or from the officers' mess, serving their meals. The Navy in 1938 restricted black sailors to the steward's branch. No combat training, no weapons, no advancement beyond the rank of mess attendant. The policy was official, codified in Navy regulations. The reasoning was simple and racist. Black men were believed to lack the intelligence and courage for combat roles. Dory reported to Naval Station Norfolk, Virginia, in January 1939 for basic training. The training was segregated. Black recruits trained separately, slept in separate barracks, ate in separate mess halls. They were taught to cook, clean, serve, and obey. They were not taught to fire weapons, operate machinery, or engage in combat. Dory learned to make beds with hospital corners, to shine officers' shoes until they reflected light, to serve meals without making eye contact, to be invisible. After 8 weeks, he was assigned to the USS Hero, an ammunition ship. His job, mess attendant. He served food, washed dishes, cleaned quarters. In June 1940, he was transferred to the USS Nevada. Same job. In January 1941, he was transferred to the USS West Virginia, a Colorado-class battleship. Same job. The USS West Virginia was one of the most powerful ships in the Pacific Fleet. Commissioned in 1923, she displaced 30,600 tons, stretched 624 feet in length, and carried a crew of 1,010 men. Her main armament consisted of 8 16-inch guns, capable of firing 2,700-pound shells over 20 miles. She had been modernized in the late 1930s with improved armor, upgraded fire control systems, and enhanced anti-aircraft defenses. Doris Miller worked below decks in the galley and laundry. He had never seen the ship's guns fired. He had never been allowed on the gun deck during training exercises. He knew the West Virginia was powerful. He had no idea how powerful because his job was to cook breakfast, not defend the ship. On December 6, 1941, the USS West Virginia was moored at Battleship Row in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The ship was tied to Pier Fox 6, outboard of the USS Tennessee. Doris Miller had been aboard for 11 months. He had fallen into the routine of Navy life. Wake at 500, prepare breakfast for the officers, serve, clean. Prepare lunch, serve, clean. Prepare dinner, serve, clean. Lights out at 2200. The routine rarely changed. Saturday, December 6th, had been routine. Doris served dinner, cleaned the galley, went to his bunk. He slept. Sunday, December 7th, began the same. Doris woke at 500, dressed, and reported to the galley. Breakfast was scheduled for 700. Officers' laundry needed collecting first. Doris gathered dirty uniforms from officer quarters and carried them to the laundry room. He began sorting. Whites separate from colors. Officers' uniforms required careful handling. Stains needed pre-treating. Doris had done this thousands of times. His hands moved without thought. The laundry room was below deck, hot, cramped, filled with the smell of soap and steam. The ship's ventilation system hummed. Water sloshed in the machines. Doris folded. Outside the morning was clear. Visibility unlimited. Temperature 78 degrees. Light winds. Perfect weather. At 7:55 a.m., Doris heard a sound he had never heard before. A low whistle, growing louder, followed by an explosion that shook the entire ship. The laundry room lights flickered. Doris dropped the underwear he was folding and looked up. Another explosion, closer. The deck beneath his feet shuddered. Alarms began blaring. General quarters, all hands to battle stations. Doris ran. He sprinted through the corridor toward his assigned battle station. As a mess attendant, his battle station was an ammunition supply role, passing shells to gunners. He had rehearsed this during drills, but never in actual combat. He reached the first ladder and climbed. Another explosion rocked the ship. The ladder tilted. Doris grabbed the rail to keep from falling. He emerged onto the main deck and stopped. The sky was filled with planes, low-flying aircraft with red circles on their wings. Japanese. Doris had heard tensions with Japan were rising, but this was war. Explosions erupted across the harbor. Ships were burning. The USS Arizona, moored ahead of the West Virginia, had been hit. Smoke poured from her superstructure. Men were jumping into the water. Doris ran toward his battle station. He never reached it. At 7:56 a.m., a Japanese torpedo struck the USS West Virginia on the port side. The Type 91 torpedo, launched from a Nakajima B-5N torpedo bomber, hit below the waterline near frame 52. The explosion was catastrophic. The warhead contained 450 pounds of high explosive. The blast tore a hole 20 feet wide in the ship's hull. Water poured in at a rate of thousands of gallons per second. The explosion killed dozens of men instantly, including everyone in the forward engine room. The West Virginia began listing to port. The list would eventually reach 28 degrees before counter-flooding measures stabilized the ship. Doris was thrown against a bulkhead. His shoulder struck steel. Pain shot through his arm. He recovered and kept moving. Men were screaming. Orders were being shouted. The ship's public address system crackled with commands, but the words were drowned out by explosions and the roar of aircraft engines. Doris reached the main deck near the bridge. Smoke obscured visibility. Fire was spreading from the Arizona. Burning oil floated on the water. Men were diving off ships, swimming through flames. At 7:58 a.m., Doris saw Captain Mervyn Bennion. The captain was lying on the deck near the bridge, his abdomen torn open by shrapnel. A bomb had hit the USS Tennessee, moored inboard of the West Virginia. The explosion had sent shrapnel flying across the narrow gap between ships. A fragment of steel, roughly the size of a dinner plate, had struck Captain Bennion. He was conscious, but mortally wounded. Blood pooled beneath him. A junior officer, Ensign Delano, was trying to apply pressure to the wound. It was not working. The captain kept giving orders, refusing to be moved from his post. Dory ran to the captain. He was a mess attendant. He had no authority on the bridge, but rank meant nothing now. He knelt beside Captain Bennion. The captain looked at him, recognized him. Bennion knew most of his crew by face, if not by name. He tried to speak. Blood came from his mouth. Dory and Ensign Delano attempted to carry the captain to safety. Bennion refused. He ordered them to leave him. He wanted to remain at his post, conscious, commanding his ship even as he died. They laid him back down. Dory looked around. The bridge was chaos. Dead and wounded men everywhere, and the anti-aircraft guns were undermanned. The West Virginia's anti-aircraft battery consisted of 8 5-inch 51 caliber guns and numerous 50 caliber machine guns. Several gun crews had been killed in the initial attack. The guns were silent. Japanese aircraft were making repeated strafing runs across Battleship Row. Dory saw a 50 caliber Browning anti-aircraft machine gun unmanned on the starboard side of the ship. The gunner was dead, slumped over the mount. Dory had never fired this weapon. He had never been trained on any weapon. Black sailors were not allowed weapons training. But the gun was there, the enemy was overhead, and no one was shooting back. Dory ran to the gun. He pulled the dead gunner away and took position behind the weapon. The Browning M250 caliber machine gun was a belt-fed, air-cooled weapon, capable of firing 450 to 600 rounds per minute. It was designed for anti-aircraft use, with a range of up to 2,000 yards against aerial targets. The gun weighed 84 pounds. Dory had no idea how to operate it. He looked at the weapon, saw the triggers, saw the ammunition belt fed into the receiver. He grabbed the handles. A white officer, Lieutenant Commander Doris Johnson, saw what Dory was doing. Johnson had been trying to organize a defense, but most gun crews were dead or wounded. He ran to Dory, showed him the basics. Point. Lead the target. Squeeze. Do not jerk. The gun will climb. Control it. Johnson left to coordinate other positions. Dory was alone with the gun. At 8:02 a.m., a Japanese Aichi D-3A dive bomber came in low over the harbor, heading toward the West Virginia. Dory swung the gun toward the aircraft. He squeezed the triggers. The Browning roared. The recoil was massive. The gun climbed. Dory fought it, pulling down, keeping the tracers on target. The 50 caliber rounds, each weighing nearly 2 ounces, streaked toward the dive bomber. Dory saw the tracers converge on the aircraft's fuselage. Smoke poured from the engine. The plane wavered, lost altitude, and crashed into the harbor 400 yards from the ship. Dory had just shot down his first enemy aircraft. He had been firing the gun for less than 30 seconds. Another aircraft appeared. Dory swung the gun, fired. Tracers cut through the sky. This plane was faster, a Mitsubishi A6M Zero fighter. The Zero was one of the most maneuverable fighters in the world. Dory led the target, watched his tracers fall behind. He adjusted, fired again. The Zero banked hard, trying to evade. Dory tracked it, kept firing. 50 caliber rounds struck the Zero's wing. The wing tore off. The Zero spun into the water. 2 planes down. For the next 15 minutes, Doris Miller manned that gun. He fired at every Japanese aircraft that came within range. He did not count his targets. He did not think about medals or recognition. He thought about survival, about protecting his ship, about the men around him who were dying. The gun overheated. Steam rose from the barrel. Dory kept firing. His hands burned from the heat. His ears bled from the noise. The deck was covered in spent shell casings. Brass casings piled up around his feet. He kicked them aside and kept firing. At approximately 8:17 a.m., Lieutenant Commander Johnson returned to Dory's position. The ship was sinking. The list had increased. Water was flooding the lower decks. Captain Bennion had died. The order was given to abandon the bridge and move wounded men to safety. Johnson told Dory to cease fire and help evacuate casualties. Dory left the gun. His hands were black with powder residue. His uniform was soaked with sweat and blood, some his own from shrapnel cuts, most from the men he had carried. Dory spent the next hour helping to evacuate wounded men from the West Virginia. The ship was settling into the harbor mud. Counterflooding had prevented her from capsizing, but she was sinking. Fire was spreading. Ammunition was cooking off. Explosions rocked the ship at irregular intervals. Dory carried men through smoke and fire. He pulled men from flooded compartments. He worked until the evacuation was complete. By 9:30 a.m., the first wave of the Japanese attack had ended. A second wave would come later, but the West Virginia was already lost. The final toll for the USS West Virginia was devastating. 106 men killed, 52 wounded. The ship settled onto the harbor bottom, her superstructure still above water, but her hull flooded. She would remain there for months before salvage operations could begin. The USS Arizona, moored ahead of her, had exploded and sunk with the loss of 1,177 men. Across Pearl Harbor, 2,403 Americans were dead. 178 were wounded. 8 battleships had been damaged or destroyed. The Pacific Fleet was crippled. And in the chaos and horror of that morning, one fact went largely unnoticed. The first American to shoot down enemy aircraft in World War II had been a black mess attendant who was never supposed to touch a gun. In the days following the attack, the Navy began documenting acts of heroism. Officers submitted reports. Witnesses gave statements. Doris Miller's actions were mentioned by multiple officers, including the Lieutenant Commander Johnson, who stated that Miller had manned a .50 caliber gun despite having no training and had fired effectively at enemy aircraft. The exact number of planes Dory shot down was unclear. Estimates ranged from 2 to 4 confirmed kills. The chaos of the attack made precise confirmation impossible. But multiple witnesses agreed. Doris Miller had shot down at least 2 Japanese aircraft. The Navy was uncertain how to handle this. A black sailor performing an act of extraordinary heroism was not part of the official narrative. The initial press releases about Pearl Harbor did not mention Dory by name. He was referred to only as an unnamed Negro mess attendant. The black press, particularly the Pittsburgh Courier, demanded his identification. They launched a campaign to discover his name and publicize his actions. In March 1942, 3 months after the attack, the Navy finally identified Doris Miller publicly. On May 27, 1942, Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, personally pinned the Navy Cross on Doris Miller's chest. The ceremony took place on the deck of the USS Enterprise at Pearl Harbor. Photographers captured the moment. Nimitz, white, in full dress uniform, awarding the medal to Dory, black, also in dress uniform, standing at attention. The Navy Cross was the 3rd highest military decoration awarded by the U.S. Navy, behind only the Medal of Honor and the Navy Distinguished Service Medal. The citation read, "For distinguished devotion to duty, extraordinary courage, and disregard for his own personal safety during the attack on the fleet in Pearl Harbor, territory of Hawaii, by Japanese forces on December 7, 1941. The award made Dory famous briefly. The Navy sent him on a war bond tour across the United States. He appeared at rallies in major cities. He spoke to crowds, urging Americans to buy bonds to support the war effort, but the tour was segregated. In southern cities, Dory entered buildings through back doors. He stayed in colored hotels. He ate in colored restaurants. He could not attend the same events as white sailors. In one city, He gave a speech encouraging Americans to fight for freedom, then was denied service at a lunch counter. The irony was not lost on him. He did not complain publicly. Complaints were not acceptable from black sailors. After the war bond tour ended in August 1942, Doris was assigned to the USS Indianapolis as a mess attendant. Not as a gunner, not as a combat sailor, as a mess attendant. The Navy had celebrated his heroism but refused to change his role. He cooked, cleaned, served. In May 1943, he was transferred to the USS Liscombe Bay, a Casablanca-class escort carrier. Again, as a mess attendant. The Liscombe Bay was a small carrier, 512 feet long, displacing 7,800 tons. She carried 28 aircraft and a crew of 916. Her mission was to provide air support for amphibious operations in the Pacific. Doris served food to pilots, washed dishes, cleaned quarters. He had saved his ship at Pearl Harbor. He had shot down enemy planes. He wore the Navy Cross. And he was still doing laundry. On November 20th, 1943, the USS Liscombe Bay participated in the invasion of Makan Atoll in the Gilbert Islands. The operation was part of the broader Central Pacific Campaign. The Liscombe Bay launched aircraft in support of Marine Corps landings. The landings were successful. The Japanese garrison was overrun. On November 23rd, the Liscombe Bay remained offshore, providing air cover. The operation was considered complete. The carrier prepared to depart. At 5:10 a.m. on November 24th, 1943, the Liscombe Bay was steaming in formation with other carriers and escort ships, approximately 20 miles southwest of Butaratari Island. The sea was calm. Visibility was good. Dawn had not yet broken. The ship was at Condition 3, a moderate state of readiness. Most of the crew was asleep or preparing for morning watch. Doris Miller was likely in the galley, beginning preparations for breakfast. At 5:10 a.m., a single torpedo fired by the Japanese submarine I-175 struck the Liscombe Bay on the starboard side near the aft engine room. The torpedo was a Type 95, carrying a 405-pound warhead. The explosion was catastrophic. The torpedo hit near the ship's bomb storage area. The resulting secondary explosions ripped the ship apart. The aft third of the Liscombe Bay disintegrated in a massive fireball. Flames shot 1,000 feet into the air. The explosion was so powerful that it was seen by ships 30 miles away. The Liscombe Bay sank in 23 minutes. There was no time for an organized evacuation. Men jumped into the water. Many were killed by the explosion. Others drowned. Some were burned by flaming oil on the water's surface. Of the 916 men aboard, 646 were killed, including Rear Admiral Henry Mullenix and Captain Irving Wiltsey. It was the worst loss of life on a U.S. carrier in a single action during World War II. Among the dead was Mess Attendant 2nd Class Doris Miller. He was 24 years old. His body was never recovered. The Navy notified Doris' mother, Henrietta Miller, by telegram on December 7, 1943, exactly 2 years after Pearl Harbor. The telegram stated that her son was missing and presumed dead. She received his personal effects, a few letters, his Navy Cross, a folded American flag. She placed the medal in a box and put it in a drawer. She could not look at it. The Navy had given her son a medal and then sent him back to the galley. And now he was dead. In the years following World War II, America celebrated its heroes. Movies were made, monuments were built, books were written. Pearl Harbor became a defining moment in American history. But Doris Miller's name faded. The first American hero of the war was forgotten. In 1953, Columbia Pictures released From Here to Eternity, a film about Pearl Harbor. The movie won 8 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. It did not mention Doris Miller. In 1970, 20th Century Fox released Tora, 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 a detailed recreation of the Pearl Harbor attack. The film was praised for its historical accuracy. It did not mention Doris Miller. In 2001, Touchstone Pictures released Pearl Harbor, directed by Michael Bay, starring Ben Affleck. The film grossed over $450 million worldwide. Doris Miller appeared briefly, played by Cuba Gooding, Jr., in a scene lasting less than 2 minutes. His name was never spoken in the film. Most viewers did not know who he was. History textbooks gave Pearl Harbor entire chapters. They described the attack in detail. The date, the time, the ships, the casualties. They mentioned heroes, pilots who got planes into the air, sailors who fought fires, officers who saved their ships. They rarely mentioned Doris Miller. When they did, it was a footnote. A black mess attendant also showed bravery. No name, no detail, just a footnote. The Navy did not name a ship after Doris Miller. They named ships after presidents, admirals, congressmen, even cities, but not after the first American hero of World War II. His family received no special recognition. His hometown of Waco erected no statue. The nation moved on. Dory's mother, Henrietta, died in 1970. She never saw her son honored beyond that single medal ceremony in 1942. His father, Connery, died in 1975. Same story. His brothers lived into the 21st century, watching America celebrate Pearl Harbor every December 7th, watching movies, seeing memorials, and never hearing Dory's name. In 2011, Texas erected a historical marker in Waco honoring Doris Miller. It was placed near the site of Moore High School, where Dory had played football. The marker was small, easily missed. Few people stopped to read it. In 2018, the Navy announced that a new Ford-class aircraft carrier would be named after Doris Miller, CVN-81, USS Doris Miller. Construction was scheduled to begin in 2026. Commissioning would occur sometime in the 2030s. By then, everyone who had known Dory would be dead, every sailor who had served with him, every officer who had witnessed his actions, every family member who remembered him. They would all be gone. The announcement came 77 years after Pearl Harbor, 77 years after Dory stood behind that gun and proved that courage has no color, 77 years after the Navy refused to train him, refused to promote him, refused to recognize him as anything more than a mess attendant. And now, finally, his name would be on a ship, a nuclear-powered supercarrier, 106 feet long, displacing 100,000 tons, capable of carrying 75 aircraft and 4,500 crew, the most powerful warship in the world, named after a man who was not allowed to fight. Doris Miller's story is a story of contradiction. He was the first American hero of World War II and the last to be remembered. He proved that black men could fight, could lead, could sacrifice, and the Navy responded by sending him back to the galley. He earned the Navy Cross and died doing laundry. He saved lives at Pearl Harbor and was killed on a ship that sank in 23 minutes. Too fast for rescue, too fast for escape. He asked for nothing and was given even less. The question that haunts Doris Miller's legacy is simple. How many other Dorys were there? How many black sailors, black soldiers, black airmen performed acts of heroism that were never documented, never recognized, never rewarded? How many were erased not because they did not deserve recognition, but because their skin color made America uncomfortable? The answer is unknowable. The records are incomplete. The witnesses are dead. The stories are lost. But Doris Miller's story survived. Not because the Navy wanted it told, not because Hollywood found it profitable. It survived because black journalists refused to let it die, because his family kept asking questions, because a few historians dug through archives and found the reports, the witness statements, the evidence that a mess attendant from Waco, Texas, had manned a gun he was never trained to use and shot down enemy planes while his ship burned. And because eventually, enough Americans decided that the first hero of World War II deserved to be remembered, even if that memory came 77 years too late. On December 7, 2021, the 80th anniversary of Pearl Harbor, ceremonies were held across the United States. Speeches were given. Wreaths were laid. Survivors, now in their late 90s and early 100s, attended. Doris Miller's name was mentioned, Not in every speech, not in every ceremony, but in some. Progress, slow and painful. A carrier bearing his name will sail someday. Children will ask who Doris Miller was, and perhaps finally they will be told the truth. He was a man who was not supposed to fight, who was not supposed to be a hero, who was not supposed to matter, but he did all three. And for that, he was forgotten. Until he was not. If this story moved you, if it made you angry, if it made you think about the heroes we choose to remember and the ones we choose to forget, hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to know that courage comes in every color, even when America refuses to see it. Subscribe to this channel, because there are more stories like Doris Miller's, stories that were buried, stories that deserve to be told. Drop a comment right now. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us if you knew about Doris Miller before this video. Tell us you were here, because Doris Miller deserves to be remembered, not as a footnote, not as an unnamed Negro mess attendant, but as America's first hero of World War II, a man who was not supposed to touch a gun, who touched it anyway, who saved lives, who proved that the color of a man's skin has nothing to do with the content of his courage. Thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering. Doris Miller died doing laundry. Let's make sure he's remembered as the warrior he was.